Hello, my science lovers! Today, we have the incomparable Amanda Cortex joining me for This Week in BS. We're going to discuss platforming extremism, all the different things that are associated with it, how we learn, and what being exposed to these different ideas can do, and what goes on in the brain. So let's go ahead and get started. What do you guys say? You ready for this? I'm ready for this. Woohoo! All right, hello. Let me unmute our super awesome guest, Amanda Cortex from Brief Brain Facts. Thank you for being part of the show again. You're like an alum now.
I know, and thanks for having me. I really enjoy these conversations.
I do too, and I think they're really important and they're really good to kind of tackle, especially when you're dealing with the science of different things. So I love that you're a part of this conversation that we're having tonight on the way that the brain works, how we form perspective. So we're not just diving into extremism and platforming that and that sort of thing. We're also going to talk about solutions. We're going to talk about how people learn, what the brain does, how we form these different neural pathways. And so who better to have on than Amanda from Brief Brain Facts?
Yay!
Yay! Is that your pupper in the background?
It is.
We love dogs here.
She's begging.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself for anybody who's new and hasn't been exposed to you or your content yet.
Well, my name is Amanda, as Mel mentioned, and I am trained in neuroscience and behavioral neuroscience specifically. I have a YouTube channel, Brief Brain Facts. You can go and check out some of my videos. It's more of a formal style type of presentation. I do like little segments pertaining to behavior and the brain. So I think you'll very much enjoy it. If you like any type of science at all, give neuroscience a try.
Neuroscience is amazing, and that's something that I always find fascinating. It's the least understood organ of the body, the brain.
I know.
And that's the thing that causes us to have the understanding.
Yes. Sorry, my dog started barking. Almost.
It's okay. Insert existential crisis. Oh, that's okay. We like dogs here, so it's all right.
She's very loud.
It's like, so you're like, you're not in a onesie. I'm not in a onesie. It's too warm for it right now. I am in my Doctor Who sweater. So this is my Doctor Who sweater and my Pink Floyd shirt. Yes, Brief Brainstorms, yes, and Brief Brain Facts. She does all of those really, really cool videos. If you haven't checked out her channel, there's a link to it in the description. Like, share, and subscribe her stuff. I was on her show just yesterday. It was just yesterday that I just saw you. We were talking about brain things. It was amazing.
Brain chemistry, specifically.
Yeah, brain chemistry, hallucinogens, and that sort of thing. So, where do you want to start? I know you have thoughts about this. What I thought we could do is talk about what propaganda does. We could talk about what extremism is like when you platform it, what that means. Also, how people form perceptions, how those perceptions could be changed, and what are the different ways that people learn, and how is it that we can talk about controversial topics, because no topic should be off limit, I think. But there's a way to go about it. So what are your thoughts on that? So we can just jumpstart from there.
So I've got many thoughts, obviously, on this particular issue because it's come up a lot recently, especially with how people's perspectives seem to be kind of leaning towards these very extreme margins, and how even current administration in the United States, and I know that there's upheaval in various places all over the world with the election of somebody like Bolsonaro, for instance, in Brazil, you're getting this kind of very extreme position, and it's very dangerous. It's a very nationalist perspective that comes out of fear, basically, and fear processing in the brain is very interesting because it overrides everything else. So fear is particularly potent, or at least associated with the amygdala, as is a lot of many other emotions, but fear is a hot spot in this area, and in addition to like the insula. So when it overrides the system, it takes captive of your brain. Usually we have two parts of our brain that are kind of battling it out together. It is the limbic system, which is kind of our emotional and impulsive area of the brain. And our prefrontal cortex is kind of our saving grace. It allows us to put nuance into things and to ask additional questions and to re-evaluate positions. And what we're discussing today, if I can kind of direct us in that, is about attitudes and evaluations of those attitudes, attitude formation and subsequent evaluations. And when you have something very fear-based, very simplistically presented, maybe presented without a good counter, or at least it's not in a balanced perspective. Maybe it's two very extreme positions, and there's nobody in the middle being represented. And even though even in the middle is the vast majority of how people believe, these two extreme positions are being presented, and they're fear-based positions. They're going to override everything else, and so people are going to automatically be in a very intense state when they're receiving this information. And fear sticks hard, and it's really hard to get rid of. And this is where all of these hateful behaviors come from. It's generated from a fear, and because it does override our rational center of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, all we're doing is making fear-based decisions at that point. And so I've got a lot of problems with platforming, for instance, very extreme positions without giving, especially without providing a counterbalance. The thing is that we already know what these extreme positions are. Nobody that would be watching this would not understand those things. Nobody that's going to watch something else that's very extreme. They're doing it for entertainment value, which is understandable. It does give views, but there's a reason, because people are inclined to do fear, are inclined to be very receptive to it. So the messages that you project during those times of fear are very important, because it does prevent us from thinking rationally. And I've got a lot of problems because we then start associating those things. And this is where the whole, if you say it enough times, if you do it enough times, people will start believing it as fact, comes in.
Well, that's the illusory truth, isn't it?
Especially when it's fear-based. And that's why you always need to have multiple rational voices in the conversation if you're going to platform those ideas in the first place. And by platform them, I mean give them a voice. I mean actually have somebody that has those perspectives on talking about those things. I'm not talking about you as a presenter saying these are the ideas and this is why they're wrong, or this is why we need to have subsequent exposure to better ideas. I'm not talking about that kind of platforming. I'm specifically talking about having an individual on that is completely counter to everything that you believe a good human being should be, like a white nationalist, for instance, somebody like Richard Spencer, and people like that. Giving them a voice, and then not having a moderator there, not having a multiple moderators there. You need to have a multiple panel type of situation where all of those people are countering that one guy. You don't that, it's going to be viewed as black and white. And again, that's very binary, easy thinking that does what? Prevents us from thinking rationally, prevents us from seeing a nuanced perspective. And I think people forget that when they're like, well, we should do it because we want to be balanced. Well, that's not a balanced perspective. That's the whole thing. That's the whole problem. If you're going to have a balanced perspective, have 5 people on to counter this one person.
See, that's kind of how I feel about when they talk about climate change. Well, we believe the both sides of climate science. I'm like, well, okay, then let's get 99 scientists to discuss climate science and how, people are responsible for climate change. And the one scientist who represents the 1%, it is an imbalance because it's not like it's an equal ground type of situation. And so when a lot of media and a lot of television, they'll present like anti-vaxxers. Well, here are these people that think that, vaccines cause autism, and here's this scientist. So you have all of these groups and you show these people marching around, don't put vaccines in your kids. And then you have just the single scientist there. But it's not just a single scientist. It's like 99.9% of the scientific community. Now, it might just be 99%. I haven't checked the latest numbers, but the studies reinforce the idea that vaccines don't cause autism. So instead of having like all of these angry moms holding up their signs and one scientist going, that's all crap, you need like 99 scientists to counter that. So that's more of what the actual reality is, and I think that's lacking a lot in some of the media.
You can't create a nuanced perspective if you don't insert something that is representative of what is being perceived in the general population, right? It's not nuance at that point. It's a black and white perspective that you're presenting.
And it's also very polarizing too.
Exactly. Which is, again, why it gets so much attention, though, because it is so polarizing. But you have to remember that the more people get exposed to these perspectives, the more likely they're going to start encompassing them and believing them as true. Again, especially without a good balance to counter it, like multiple people, because it's so easy to take on those perspectives because they are so fear-based.
And then you consider the fact that the vast majority of the U.S. is not scientifically literate, and it's getting worse. They're not heavy critical thinkers. So what I thought we could talk about a bit is a lot of these extremists have the same rhetoric. They read off the same type of script over and over and over again. And so, and I have the educator standpoint and you have the neuroscience standpoint. From your idea, what does that do with like the neurons in the brains when you're exposed to the same rhetoric? We hear a lot of the same stuff coming out of the White House saying this is fake news, this isn't real, this isn't accurate. And you're like, yeah, no, here it is. But this is coming out so regularly, and especially given in like social media and Facebook and YouTube, where you can just pick the different types of perspectives that you have, you can just cater exclusively to your particular bias. So what do you think that does when you're exposed to the same rhetoric over and over? It's like, because I feel like they read off a script, because a lot of the stuff we hear is the same type of stuff we've always heard from these groups, and it's nothing new. So in what you've learned, what does that do to like the neural networks, and how does that reinforce and strengthen those particular perspectives, and how it can actually shift your perspective towards that?
This is propaganda 101, right? It's providing an easy to digest message in sound bites. You'll see, people do it all the time. One soundbite that I use is that 40,000 people die every year in the United States due to lack of access to healthcare. And this is a failure of our healthcare system. Now, that's a soundbite that I am providing to people so that they understand. And it's good. The more you say it, the more people believe it, regardless of its accuracy, because people don't go and check those numbers. Even though I'm happy to provide that to anybody if you want to understand where I got that number from. 40,000 people a year. It was from a Harvard survey. Anyways, but people don't verify the information. The more you say it in easy digestible sound bites, the more it becomes true. And this happens to be due with we do. This happens to do with, as far as neurons are concerned, if we're under the belief that that we're capable of neurogenesis, which is developing new neurons, it could promote activity there. If you're under the belief that neuroplasticity is a thing and does exist, and there's a lot of evidence to support it, it could strengthen connections between existing cells. And so every time an action potential, which I just discussed on my channel, if you want,
that was a great video. Go check it out, guys.
Yeah, if you want to see how our brain cells communicate, that's what I'm referring to, is how our brain cells communicate with each other. And part of that has to do with creating action potentials. And an idea is that every time an action potential fires, it strengthens the connections between those neurons that are talking to each other. And so, again, this would be receiving information and digesting it. So every time you're strengthening your neurons, strengthening those connections. And this is why exposure is such a big deal when it comes to believability.
Yeah. Well, and and there's something I'm a big voice when it comes to cognitive bias. This is something that we all have, and that doesn't make us bad people, but we have to keep it in check. And so one of the things that people find comfort in, and I was just on Cyrus the Skeptic show with Ocean just a little bit ago. So if you came over from there, welcome. I was talking a bit about how people can kind of find relation to different awful human beings. One of the examples I gave is a film that actually kind of shook me to the core was Seven, because I could understand to a degree the killer's argument. And that kind of shook me to the core, because he was going around doing these horrible things to people, but I found his argument quite logical. And it caused me to go, oh my God. And it caused me to reflect a little bit. And it's like, I get what he's saying, but how he's going about it is really wrong. Now, I don't have a general trust in the population that people will self-reflect. I don't generally trust, especially with the latest National Science Foundation, their figures. They are... The majority of the U.S. is just not critical thinkers. Right. I don't trust that they're going to do their homework. I don't trust that they're going to self-reflect. Go, maybe my ideas aren't so great. We had an entire election that was based on people sharing Facebook memes that were propaganda. So I don't subscribe to the idea that adults are going to do the right thing. I mean, I just don't. And so I tend to err on the side of caution when I talk about controversial topics, in that I personally have worked in education. I've dealt with kids. I've dealt with their parents. They hold true to certain belief systems that they're going to believe no matter what evidence they're presented with. And so if they find some kind of kinship in a person that's promoting a harmful ideal, I feel like that's probably, the likelihood that's going to stick. I don't know that I want to risk that. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
So always erring on the side of caution is probably the better perspective to take. We can't, I don't want to degrade or disparage the American populace, but the truth is that you're right. They're, just on the whole, Americans have a difficult time with critical thinking and even with understanding science. Now, this is a failure in a lot of different arenas, I would argue, but that's for another day. Mm-hmm. It's sad, and I've thought about this, and I'm probably sure that a lot of people aren't going to agree with me with this, is that if you want a certain message, or if you want to counter a certain message, we have to start playing, the propaganda game. Yeah. Because usually we provide all of these facts and figures, and it's overwhelming for people. And people need sound bites to better understand. Even if it pushes, if it gets us to a point where we can start addressing science literacy a little bit more effectively, then great. But it has to start somewhere. And I'm okay with disseminating propaganda if it assures the healthy survival of others.
And if it moves things in a positive direction. I was just talking about, I had a paper that I had talked about on another stream. Let me get the title of that, and I've posted it many, many times on my Twitter, and that's my scrolling, so you guys can hear the scroll. All right, so this particular paper is called Spreadable Spectacle in Digital Culture, Civic Expression, Fake News, and the Role of Media Literacies in the Post-Fact Society. It's a paper that appeared in American Behavioral Scientist in a Sage publication. Paul, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong, so I am sorry, Paul. It's Mihailidis, I believe Paul Mihailidis and Samantha Viati. They wrote this, and they explored, essentially, here's what the abstract says. So I'll just give you the lowdown. It says the article explores the phenomenon of spectacle in the lead up and immediate aftermath of the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Through the spread of misinformation, the appropriation of cultural iconography, that's the word, sorry.
That's it.
Words are hard, guys.
I know. That's what I try to tell people. It's harder.
And the willing engagement of mainstream media to perpetuate partisan and polarizing information, the proliferation of populist rhetoric, polarizing views, and vitriolic opinions spread. Revisiting the world of critical theorist Guy Debord, this article argues that the proliferation of citizen-driven spectacle is unique in its origination and perpetuation, and a direct result of an increasingly polarized and distrustful public spreading an increasing amount of time in the homophilous networks like Facebook, where you just pick what you want to see, where contrarian views are few and far between. We apply the frame of spreadable media to explore how citizen expression online initiated, sustained, and expanded the media spectacle that pervaded the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The conclusion of this work argues that media literacies, as a popular response mechanism to help cultivate more critical consumers of media, must be repositioned to respond to an era of partisanship and distrust. We present a set of considerations for repositioning these literacies to focus on critique and creation of media in support of a common good that can respond meaningfully in an era of spreadability, connectivity, and spectacle. So this particular paper I found pretty riveting. It's about 14 pages. If you want me, I can email it to you sometime.
Yeah,
give it a
that'd
read.
be great.
It proposed lots of different solutions in addressing problematic and controversial topics without inadvertently causing it to be further spread. And one of the things that this paper points out is the fact that just by covering a topic, you contribute to it being spread even further. And that was a problem. And we see the New Zealand shootings, that sort of thing right now, So I wonder, what are your thoughts on exposure of these particular type of controversial issues, and how they present a lot of different solutions on how we can counter that. What do you think? What do you think is required in order to discuss these controversial issues without causing further damage?
I think, that's a great question, and I'm hoping that paper does have more recommendations based.
I'll throw them out for you here in a bit.
Yeah.
I'm just curious of what your initial thoughts are.
But my initial thoughts is to basically not present it too often, or again, to provide some sort of counterbalance that makes it a very unacceptable perspective to take. Because I think people already, again, the vast majority of people probably already know that these perspectives exist. So I don't really understand why we have to go through the ringer to prop them up or to present them to people. People know that they exist. What they don't know are, the healthier solutions to some issues that people are facing. They don't know those things. They don't know that the ideas exist because nobody ever puts those on the table when they talk to these people or when these people are platformed. And I have no idea why they don't. Why they don't say, actually, 90% of the population does not agree with this. Right. They don't mention that stuff. And which again further exacerbates the problem, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree with you on that. I think, it's funny. It's just, you and I, we have a slightly different background when it comes to being able to research and find reputable sources and that sort of thing. Because you and I have been trained in the science field, so we know when somebody, and I think Carl Sagan best is science is a way to, oh God, what was the quote? Essentially, it says science is a way to know when somebody's lying to you. Or I thought science is I have to find the quote now because I actually made a video on this. Because this is driving me crazy. But that's the thing. Science has taught us how to counter a lot of the BS that we come across. Like, where's your evidence? What's your evidence on this? I don't really find this compelling. Do you have anything else? And I find often that a lot of people don't understand that asking for evidence is absolutely okay.
Right. I think it's people want to defer to this, defer to authority. If you seem like you're an authoritative figure or you know what you're talking about, it's credible. It's convincing. When it's coming from somebody that's in the higher social hierarchy, right? In a higher position than you, those sources appear to be credible. People don't ask questions. They don't ask a lot of questions. And so hopefully people will start doing that. But again, it's really getting them to be able to getting them to warm up to this. It's also getting people in the science community to start saying we need citizen skeptics, right?
Right.
We need them. And so they need to come out of the academic ivory tower, if you will.
Oh,
and
yes.
talk to others and tell them, tell them what your science is about. Tell them that science is about creating a skeptic. Tell them that, we do ask for evidence. We do want to see it. And that is okay. And that we need more citizens that are capable of doing this. And hopefully over time that'll help. In the immediacy, I don't see that helping, but it can start the process. I think we still need to, figure out how to do the propaganda stuff.
Absolutely.
In more immediacy.
So somebody was throwing some Carl Sagan quotes in the chat. The one that I was looking for is, science is a way to call the bluff on those who only pretend to knowledge.
Oh, wow. That's a good quote.
That's the quote I was looking for. But some other people, I love Carl Sagan. If you haven't read The Demon Haunted World, it's amazing and quite apt and relevant to current times. It's probably my favorite book. Wow. And if you haven't checked it out, The Demon Haunted World, it's almost like reading a prophecy. It's kind of weird because he saw the decline. He started to write about what he fears as a decline of society and how anti-intellectualism, it kind of rises up. Right. And so because of the various different things that people put a lot of weight into. So if you haven't read The Demon Haunted World, it's amazing. So they said science is more than a body of knowledge, it's a way of thinking. Yeah, so people were throwing that quote in there, but my quote I was looking for is science is a way of calling the bluff on those who only pretend to knowledge, because you can always ask for evidence, and if they don't have it, they don't have it. And you're like, yeah, you don't have it, so I'm not going to believe you. Right. And so I find that's exceedingly important, and that's a thing that a lot of the general population lacks the ability to do, because they think, oh, I'm a jerk if I ask for this evidence, or I'm being rude, or or they're afraid of the evidence. That can be a thing too. Cognitive dissonance is absolutely horrible.
Now, you've got to recall that in the United States, there's been a concerted effort to uh, basically make sure or assure an ignorant population. There's a concerted effort. That's why you see defunding of public services, the defunding of public schools, and things like that. And so and also including the insertion of religious ideology, right? To keep a complacent populace and also an ignorant populace. Because when you have a smart populace, the smart populace starts understanding how systems work and how things are systemic in society. They start understanding that the structure needs to change. And those that have, taken the reins have determined that, it is in their best interest to keep the population ignorant. So that's something that needs to be combated and needs to also be considered when people are presenting or platforming what I would say are anti-intellectual ideas. All of them are anti-intellectual. Because people aren't going to evaluate it. They're going to see it on a show, see that, hey, this show is somewhat well produced or whatever. It is therefore by fact, and there's nothing else you can do to convince me of this. And it's a failure in our society that I hope, will address sooner as opposed to later.
I know, I agree. And having been an educator, I've seen how that kind of goes, and it's actually quite frustrating, because when I was teaching biology, half of my evaluation was based on a single test on one day. So 50% of me being a good or bad teacher was based on a bunch of scores from a bunch of kids, from my students. And here's what's weird. The thing is the error bars on their scores on how well they did were just so huge. It was like 12% possible error on these. It just, you would have thrown it out. So as a scientist, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, what is this? But all I needed was, and there's no other variables that are considered. All I needed was a kid to break up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, get in a fight with their parents. I had a kid get in a car wreck the day of the test. Smart kid. And if your smart kids fail that test, you're suddenly a horrible teacher and you're docked all these points. So there was just like, so they were wanting to tie pay to that. So you have a lot of teachers that are restricted to these state mandated tests, that they teach the content so heavily because their livelihood is based on that they don't go into the critical thinking. They don't get into all that. So we have all of these adults that understand, oh, here are the stages of mitosis, but they don't know why it happens that way. They don't question anything. They're like, well, I just got through that class and I forgot it forever because I don't need it now. So it's just, they don't know how to critically think, and that's something that's not actively taught in the schools.
Can I add something that
Sure, go ahead.
Just an observation, and maybe you'll convince me otherwise. But I feel like this is, again, tying such a huge portion of somebody's livelihood to the performance of a test is really pitting teacher against student. If you think about it, it's pitting class, within the same class structure, the people against each other, and it's starting at a very early age. I feel like that's part of the problem, and it's part of the quote unquote elite solution, to keeping a ignorant and complacent population at bay.
I have anecdotal experience with this. When the first year I was teaching, I had students go, well, if we fail on that test, it's going to look bad on you. I'm like, I can just teach at another school. I don't care. You fail this test, you're going to have to take biology again. Good luck. So it's just that can be used as a weapon so much to where you have these parents that'll come in and they're like, well, my kid has got to do well. My kid has got to do this. And they need these good scores in order to get into university. And now we have these parents that have these kids that aren't worthy of the university, paying money to get them into there. So it's just, you have a huge problematic system when it comes right down to it, educational wise, both preschool, elementary, secondary, and then you have, have undergrad, graduate. You have the systematic problem where we're not thinking. We're not encouraging critical thinking. So now it's like we have a population, and the latest statistics on the National Science Foundation, they do every 2 years, every 2 years or so, they do they run a survey and try to find out what the general, and they usually pull like 1,000 people and they have them take a science literacy test to kind of see what the different standards are that they understand. In 2016, it was 24% of the U.S. thought that the sun revolved around the earth. It's now 27%. So it's actually getting worse.
How does that?
So when you walk into a bar, more than 1 in 4 think that the sun revolves around the earth.
How?
That's where we're at. And so, so for me, as a science communicator and as a person who sees, you put on an alt-right person, or you put on somebody who has oppressive ideologies, and even if you're debating them, I'm sitting there, I'm like, we have a whole lot of people in the U.S. that think the sun revolves around the earth. They don't critically think. They don't accept evidence. And one thing that I would never want happen on my channel is to have somebody take my content and misuse it and turn it into a soundbite for an oppressive ideology, much like Pepe the Frog, and other things. They'll take portions and then they'll use that and say, well, she said this one thing this one time, so I'm going to use that and to kind of push my personal narrative and my agenda.
Right. And that's why I think, that's why I think people that do have these backgrounds in science and do have, some sort of like academic understanding, they need to come down and talk, like down, quote unquote down, but they need to come and talk to the population and let them know that we are absolutely human, and humanize science to an extent, right? Mm-hmm. That's, you see the dangers of people like Jordan Peterson, for instance.
Yeah.
Psychologist in Canada somewhere. And he has pretty right-wing ideas that never get counteracted because he is, an educated individual and has some sort of authority there by his education. What they fail to see is that his education is quite specialized. It's in a specific field. It is not in political understanding. It is not in sociology and the dynamics of the racism might play on individuals. It has nothing. His education is nothing to do with what he proposes and what he talks about. That people just eat up. And again, it's conforming to that bias or forming to that bias. But again, they're taking him as the central authority for that. And that's why people like you, Mel, and me need to, counteract that message. Hopefully we'll make a dent at some point. That's my goal.
And see, that's mine too. And the thing is if you have people on and they have an oppressive ideology and they have any kind of academic background, that just kind of reinforces their perspective, even if it has nothing to do with what they're talking about. And then you look at people like Andrew Wakefield, who published that with falsified data in that journal. I mean, he was stripped of his medical degree. He's pretty much kicked out of his own country, but that didn't matter. People will still go to, well, this one guy, this one time. And it doesn't matter that it's been refuted and, you know, he admitted to falsifying data. It doesn't matter. And then they'll sit there and they'll say, well, he was probably pressured. And so, and I sit there and I've talked to anti-vaxxer parents, and I'll sit there and I'll say, would you let a pedophile watch your children? Well, no, I would never put them in danger. I said, but what if he said he wasn't a pedophile anymore? Would you still let him watch your children? Well, no, I wouldn't do that. Well, that's the same as Andrew Wakefield. He said that, yes, I falsified that data. Yes, I did these things. Yes, it was extremely unethical what I did to these children. But hey, but it's just, they don't connect the two. And they don't see that. And it's just, so when you have somebody on who has a strong academic background, people who subscribe to even a little bit, they'll go, oh, well, this person has a PhD in such and such. They have these views. Maybe I should listen. And so if it's not treated as the garbage that it is, then you're going to run the risk of giving them some kind of credibility by being able to tout out their credentials. Well, I have this, and I have this, and I have this. You should listen to me. And then they spout out the script that they say everywhere else on every other channel or news outlet that they can in an effort to push their agenda. I don't understand why an extremist would ever want to be on a show unless they knew that they, number one, were not outgunned, and two,
the point.
Didn't have an opportunity to kind of sow their seeds. I was supposed to be in a show once with a person named Jilly Juice. She calls herself Jilly Juice. She basically has like a super high salt drink that she would tell people, and you had fermented cabbage on there, but the high salt content was so harmful to people's bodies that it caused just horrible intestinal issues. It actually caused a stroke in one person because of the high salt content. But when she found out I was going to be on there, she's like, well, you're just going to debunk me. I'm not going to be able to sow any seeds and collect people. She actually posted a video about this, saying she decided to not be on that show because of the fact she didn't think she'd get anything out of it. So, it's kind of like, if you're going to go that route, you have to have somebody who's going to rival that particular perspective effectively, to where it's going to show this is why you're wrong, and they're going to stick to their guns. But it's just, what you have to think of, why in the world would a person want to be on a thing like that if they weren't going to try to push their narrative?
Yeah, and that's the interesting part. You've got to outweigh the risks, or the benefits, right? The risks and benefits. And so what I see happening a lot of the time is that even with these what I would consider to be more extreme perspectives over on the right, for instance, those people are like, well, I've offered people to debate me, but then nobody does it. Well, that's not true, because I've seen people extend offers of debate to these people multiple times that are considerably leftist. And, saying, hey, debate me, come on my show, come on your show, I'll come on your show, I'll debate you. And they will not take that offer. And so you have to be considerate or mindful of intention and people's intent. So is it really about, getting a balanced perspective, being fair, giving everybody a chance? Is it really about promoting healthy ideas, ideas that you think are solid, or is it something else? Maybe, if your ideas can be torn apart easily, right? Then maybe you have a problem, and maybe it's more about propaganda than it is about actually promoting good ideas that are sound. And it's so infuriating to see these people come into these fields or these spaces pretending like they're some, warrior for whatever cause. And might I add, let's just stop with the whole social justice warrior, like degrading them. Because here's the thing, everything is about social justice. Everything. You will see it on the right when they protect this white person and say he has the right to hold a gun to people's heads if they're brown and in a mosque. You will see that. That is a fucking form of social justice. Excuse me. That is a form of social justice in and of itself. It's just a opposite form of social justice.
Are you getting passionate, Amanda?
Yes. I just hate this because the right is so good, by the way, with their sound bites and propaganda. They are very good at what they do.
Well, it's all
and
fake
that's
news.
Why you see these rises so frequently. It's because they know how to tailor a message and they know what works.
I mean,
and so
we have marketing. We have an entire section of our capitalistic system just based on marketing. I mean, you can look at a symbol and know, oh, that's Burger King, that's Nike, that's Starbucks, that's McDonald's. You have an entire field of research just on what colors do people like better. I used to work in formal wear, and usually most people are right-handed, so when they come in, you want your best display on the right. So everything that's your high-end stuff would be on the right. So when they walk in, these are really nice formals. This is what we want to do. So I mean, having had a background in retail, I mean, that's a thing. So there's an entire system, an entire bunch of research just based on what sounds do people like.
Can I address something in your comments by Lady Dakini?
Sure.
I hate to interrupt you.
It's okay.
But Lady Dakini seems to be pretty put off by the fact that I said Jordan Peterson is right-wing. Dave Rubin is also right-wing, and so I will call that. But Lady Dakini also mentioned that as an undergrad, they studied linguistics. What did they study? Narrative theory and linguistics. And so having a background in linguistics myself, there's a lot to do with culture and perspective and relativity. And so I would consider Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin equally right-wing from my perspective, because I am a very hard leftist. And that's where that's coming from. And so when you consider that people are going to do whatever definition that they define somebody's based off of their own ideology, that's something to keep in mind, that we all hold our own perspectives and our own placement along that ideological spectrum. And I would be very, very far to the left in comparison to classical liberal Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. So I just want to mention that.
So that just kind of lends into, we can get into a little bit of neuroscience on this. What forms are perspectives in regard to neuroscience, and how can we shift perspectives? Is it an easy task? I can go about the learning side if you want to go about the neuroscience side. What forms are perspectives, and how easy is it to shift them? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's complicated, and there's a few theories as far as perspective formation. Some of it's saying that, you start very early on, obviously learning, what works for you in your particular society or your household, or societal household. And again, it is very difficult to reform perspective, because it's harder to unlearn something than to learn it initially, right? And so you've got sensory information coming in, and by sensory information, I'm talking about everything, whether it's thought information, tactile, any of the senses, a perspective from someone else. And so that will come in, it'll probably get transferred to your thalamus. There'll be some emotional reactivity to it, especially if it's an ideology. But if it's a told ideology that you're exposed to over and over again from a very early age, you don't have to use your prefrontal cortex, something like the orbital frontal cortex, to reevaluate it. Especially, there's no need to reevaluate it because you've already accepted that as truth. It's not until you get outside of that bubble. We all kind of exist in bubbles anyways. But that's what college has been good for so many people, is getting outside of their own bubble and saying, wow, this other perspective exists. This other thing that exists. So that forces people to start reevaluating their own perspective, start moving that perspective from your, more emotional reactivity center to your thought processes, to your, more higher, they call it higher level cognition, right?
Right.
And you start using your, prefrontal cortex and start reevaluating it. And then you've got interplay, but it's kind of a circuit. You've got interplay between your thalamus, amygdala, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, orbital frontal cortex, hypothalamus, anterior cingulate cortex, and so on and so forth. But it's a fascinating phenomenon, by the way. But it's so hard to get people to do that, to reevaluate it. And again, it's inserting that nuanced perspective into the discussion. It's inserting the fact that other people have a different perspective than you. Perspective taking is actually a very hard phenomenon to do, to like walk a mile in someone else's shoes. People have to learn to do it. And people
maybe we don't teach it enough.
And it's possible that we don't. I think that we do live in a society that does emphasize the individual so much so that it becomes corrosive. Because this is my theory of like current societal pressures on our cognition and mental health. Even I think that it's all related, but it does create a very having the individualism perspective does allow you to separate yourself from the other. Which, again, when you separate yourself from the other, your theory of mind may be degraded to some capacity, and you lack the capability, or at least the initial capability that you may have had in a different society that was more collective, for empathy and sympathy of others.
Right.
And that's dangerous, because we actually need to have that phenomenon, because we are social animals. We thrive in social environments. Even if you are like me and like, an introvert, I still rely on people around me. And people around me rely on me to some capacity. At least I hope they do to some extent.
Okay.
But yeah, it's problematic. It's really hard to unlearn bad habits. It's a bad habit, right? It's hard to unlearn.
It is
because
hard to
those
unlearn.
Connections are already built, right? And they've been strengthened and strengthened and strengthened and strengthened over time.
So to some idea, if you have a certain perspective, you would seek out that same perspective in order to reinforce your own personal perspective to a degree. And if you're challenged with something that's outside of your own, you would have to be exposed to it several times in order to kind of address it. Would you agree with that?
Yes. You'd have to, that's why it's bad to platform bad ideas, though, too, in the reverse.
Yes. So you may be a person who has very positive and progressive perspectives, but if you're exposed to a lot of harmful ideologies, and if you resonate with a few of the points and you're regularly exposed to that, you're not immune to that same type of shift of perspective, that illusory truth that we see.
Exactly. Especially if you're under some sort of state of distress or hardship, right? So
like the current administration.
Right. And so, it's the current administration I would argue, uses things like scapegoating to basically, to blame the problems that somebody else may be having or experiencing or feeling onto these very powerless people.
And that's kind of easy to do.
I don't know why Lady Dakini, I'm not a philosopher, so I don't know anything about the philosophical aspect of theory of mind. By theory of mind, I'm encompassing the idea that another self exists outside of your own self, and that you're able to do some perspective taking. You're able to also elicit empathy towards others. This would all fall under a theory of mind umbrella within the brain sciences. But as far as philosophy is concerned, I have no idea what they talk about. I don't know.
Well, I mean, philosophy has its merit on helping to establish the scientific process. But that's kind of where it ends. So you have to kind of recognize that, philosophy did bring about the scientific process. And you go through the evidence, and then you say, you argue the evidence, you make certain that it's repeatable, so you don't remake the wheel with that. The only time philosophy comes back again is in the moral and ethical standpoint of, okay, we've done this thing. Is it a good thing or not? Who does it affect? How is this an issue? Yes or no? That's where the philosophy, I feel, comes back into it as well. I thought I could talk about a bit on how, because it's important that we talk about controversial topics. It's important that we address problematic views. And I feel no topic is particularly off limits. We should be able to have open discussion about things, but there's a way to do it without contributing to any further problems. And this is my perspective. But having been a person who's had to, and I brought this up in the on another stream on Cirrus's channel. I've taught evolution in the Bible Belt as a biology teacher, where I had to make certain these kids understood evolution because they had a state test coming up. Okay, so I'm in a room with a bunch of children who have been told the devil planted the fossils, that's why evolution is wrong. So in that scenario, I'm the extremist. So I'm the one that's presenting all of these controversial topics that they immediately have been taught to completely shut out. And so there's a way you can talk about controversial topics without doing any harm to their personal perspectives, to what they feel is what faith versus science and that sort of thing. And the way that I would go about it was I don't have degrees in religion. I'm not an expert in religion. And I'm not going to tell you what religion is, what your faith is, what you should believe. I want to make certain you understand what the facts are. Here are the facts. I want to make certain you understand what the words mean, what the concepts are. This is what it is. This is what scientists do. This is why the evidence that says that this is the correct way that things happened. You can take this evidence and you can do what you want with it. Right. So you put the power back on the people who are watching your presentation, and you're like, I'm not going to tell you what or what to think. I just want to make certain you understand what the facts are. Here are the facts. But
don't you think that, when you do it in that way, and I understand, putting it in their hands to allow them to make the decision to accept it or not. But the only reason that they're even listening to you is that they have to do it for the test.
Exactly. That's a completely different situation.
Right. So what do you do with people that don't have to take a test to learn the information? How do you will them or convince them that this is worth knowing?
Yeah, you do have a point there, and that's a really, really good thing to kind of point out, and that kind of leads me into that paper that I was talking about before, about the media is primarily the main source of how people get their science in the adult world. They're not going to go and say, oh, I want a news scientist or a popular science. I don't know how those magazines stay in business, especially in the way that it's gone with the anti-intellectualism.
Right.
Um, I kind of resonate a bit of what this particular paper says, having been a teacher, and I'll tell you what their ideas are on what we need to do. And here's all my scrolling sounds. So if you hear like little weird sounds, okay, this is what they propose to do with media. And so they say below are a series of considerations for repositioning media literacies to respond to the emerging phenomenon of spectacle and post-fact culture. These considerations support the development of media literacy research, practice, and teaching directed at the critique and creation of media in support of a common good that can respond meaningfully in an era of spreadable spectacle. So there are four. They have four suggestions for this. The first suggestion they have is repositioning media literacies for spreadable connectivity. So this particular paragraph, they talk about, they say essentially normative approaches to critical inquiry that focus on a distance critique of media messages is no longer sufficient in digital culture. Media literacy must focus on connecting humans, embracing differences, and finding a way to acknowledge but move past mainstream media as the point of entry for analysis. So what I'm taking from that is that we have to understand that people are not going to just watch the news and read the newspaper, because they're held to different standards than like cable TV, like Fox News. And if you haven't, and I mentioned this on another stream, Dan Rather, you should follow his Facebook. He gets into a lot of the history on how it is that we have a news hour that was lobbied for through Congress so that news stations could have airwaves allowed by the FCC in order to have an unbiased presentation of the news. Shows like Fox News and stuff like that, and YouTube, and all of these other type of venues and platforms are not regulated by the FCC, so they're not required to present facts in a specific way to where libel and that sort of thing is thing. So it's vastly different. It's not government regulated like FCC airwaves. And so, but they present a compelling argument. We've got to promote an idea that we're all in this together. We've got to kind of foster an environment to where, yes, this is going to affect you, but this also affects other people. And we have to understand that the TV and the newspaper are not the ways that people get their information anymore. And how are we going to combat that with an era of post-fact, fake news, alternative facts? So they first say we've got to acknowledge this, and news outlets need to kind of take that into consideration. The next thing that they say is a potential way to resolve this. Repositioning media literacies as mechanisms for caring. All right. So, and this is what they say. This, again, is from the same paper. When literacies are framed around responsible consumption, they tend to focus on the tools necessary to deconstruct messages, but only on the ways in which this information can facilitate caring for one another. Media literacy would be well served by thinking more explicitly about how pedagogy and practice can be seen as relational and not individualistic, and focused on caring for and about and not individual skill attainment. So that presents the argument of, this isn't just affecting you. We need to care about other people too, and this is why. So media needs to be kind of maybe not so, there's two sides to every story. The anti-vaxxers and people who vaccinate, here's the, no. Anti-vaxxers are killing people. So.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating because I do think that the media is largely responsible for some of these things that get promoted in our society, because they are a main source of material for the vast majority of adults. Um, if you have you ever read old newspapers? I don't.
Oh,
I
yeah.
used to, I used to do that, and there was a newspaper that actually would collect certain things from
Mm,
old newspapers in the city that I lived, and they would republish them in a little volume, like a new newspaper, but it was
mm,
always old, very old, archaic stuff.
mm,
And well, for me, and some of those articles, they were evaluation articles. They weren't just saying that this phenomenon occurred. They were saying this phenomenon occurred, and this is why this was not okay to happen.
right.
Don't see that a lot of the time, especially in more mainstream media circuits. You don't see the evaluation piece of it anymore. That has been completely taken out of these things. And I wish, I'm not in media, so I can't tell them how to do their
Mm,
job.
right,
But I
right.
think that they have currently done such a disservice to the American people that I have a right to tell them how to do their job. Because they have hurt people. Because doing this stupid CNN type of reporting, breaking news, anti-vaxxers, they believe this, and then
Oh
there's the science that
gosh.
debunked that a million years ago. But they anti-vaxxers. I mean, it's such a disservice. It's so bad and
It's
so
just
unhealthy.
it's like, oh my gosh. So I want to give a shout out to Maddie. Thank you so much for your super chat. I want to read it really quickly because he gave us. He said, "This is an incredible team. Whoever put you two in contact was a genius. Love this show." Formerly the Godless Iowan, known as Just Maddie now. Thank you. Yes, Amanda's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. I'm so glad we got in contact. She's been a delight to speak with on multiple occasions now.
Yay!
So okay, I thought I could break down the last two. There's just two more suggestions that they have. So they say the third suggestion they have is repositioning media literacies as facilitators of everyday engagement. And so this is what they say. Imagining media literacy as active engagement allows the process to matter as much as the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Research conducted by one of this article's authors found that by focusing media literacy on critical skill attainment alone, young people were prone to be more cynical, less willing to engage in dialogue, and less trustful of media and institutions in the first place.
Interesting.
Media literacies that focus on participation in local issues can frame the critique and creation of messages as connected to one's sense of place, belonging, and community.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to say, you have a place here, you are important, you matter, what you do is important, and engaging people in that way rather than just giving them information for the sake of information, but engaging them to everyday life and how it affects them and how they can make a difference is exceedingly important. That's what I read from that. What do you think about that?
No, it makes a lot of sense because it gives community feeling, and community is very important for humanity. Actually, we all need to feel connected, which again is why I have such a critique of individualistic societies.
Mm,
But it makes that sounds like it makes a lot of sense to me, and
mm,
tying an issue with something that affects them um, is important, because it will
mm.
allow people to take the perspective of others a bit better, because they
Right.
can then see why it matters. Well, ultimately, it does end up leading to the certain effect on me and my family. So if we can
Mm-hmm.
get, if we can address this early on, the better. That way, it doesn't hurt so many people, or that way it helps so many people, whichever.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but yeah, creating a community is important. And I think that's why some communities find each other quite easily.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I would say, right wing has a very good way of doing this because they know how to message. They know how to create that community, whether it's through, certain dog whistles or, certain, emoji displays. They know how to do it, whether
Right.
it's, taking ownership of that little Pepe frog. You see, the person that didn't the comic writer that created him kill him because he hated what they had done with it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I
and
don't
so,
blame him.
yeah, I think he ended up, killing Pepe the frog because he didn't like that it was being utilized for that purpose.
And it's kind of frightening to think that whatever you put on the internet can be taken and turned into something else. And
Yeah,
that's got,
that's always the risk you take, though.
that is the risk you take. And again, that's kind of why I err on the side of caution, because I don't want somebody uttering my name before they shoot up a bunch of people in a church or a school or whatever. I just, and if they do, then it'll be because they hate me so much, not because, oh, she told me these things and that resonated with me. And then I decided to go and, I don't know. Either way, it's a horrible, horrible thought.
Yeah,
But
that is horrible.
yeah, it's a horrible thought in general. But the just I work really hard to try to be a voice of reason. And I think, when you pose the question of the students in my classroom they knew that they had a stake in the matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, I think, what we need to do as science communicators and also in the media is to convince the public you have a stake in this matter when it regards
Right.
to other people, and it's important that you educate yourself for these reasons.
But it's also important to try to diminish that message that these other people are on the other side.
Right,
And
right,
it's not, and they may be talking of like, well, free speech, I'm a free speech warrior, and I think it's always 50-50 chance. But if you know anything about how people learn, then you know that it can't be exactly like that.
No, it
You
can't.
have to try to stifle these very bad, hateful ideas as best as possible, and that it means that you don't platform them.
Right. And so, like the fourth point, and then I would like to get into the learning aspect. I know we've been talking for a little bit. This is awesome. So the fourth option that they give to kind of direct media is reimagining media literacies as intentionally civic. And so what they say is, last, media literacy as a movement has been constrained by a need to be apolitical. Much has been made about the need to teach about media's role in society and specifically about potentially harmful messages. These low-hanging fruits for media literacy, while relevant, perpetuate a frame of reference that sees problems as structural. Media literacy must focus on civic impact, the ways in which media can be used to impact at realistic scale the political, social, and cultural issues that define our democracy. So we need to talk about the dirty laundry, but we need to do it in a way of saying, this is what's affecting people. This is what's for the good of humanity. If we continue to go down this path, these people are going to be hurt. This thing is going to happen. And so sometimes you have to get political. We can't just sugarcoat, hey, genocide ain't so bad. Let's talk about that a little bit. Well, this is just their opinion. They want to kill and hurt people. So you kind of have to call a duck a duck.
Absolutely. And that's, again, where the media comes in and where they've failed at doing that they didn't call it out like it is. For instance, Donald Trump lies something of a few times a day. He's telling a lie to the American people, as if it's fact. Yet you don't see the media going, y'all, he's lying.
He's lying, yo.
This right. You don't see that. The media doesn't do that. They'll say, this may not be entirely accurate, or, they try to go through all of this like rigmarole to figure out how he could be right. not
It's like,
ever tell him that. Not ever.
he
I
might
don't think
think
I've
this
ever
is
seen
correct,
anybody.
but it's kind of
Right.
just, bless his
And that,
heart. They just might as well throw a bless his heart at the end. That's what we do in the South. They're like, wow, they think that's the truth. Bless their heart. This is the way of just saying. It's like oh wow, they wore that outfit to church. Bless their heart. Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
so it's all interconnected again. We all have to kind of figure out the best that we can. Now, I've got issues with having to, take this stuff into consideration because I'm thinking, being this, diverting to a very individualistic mode here. Why is it on my shoulders to have to do this? Why is it on my shoulders to be particularly careful about what I say or dispense to others? What is my responsibility? What is my responsibility in this, and what should be my burden? And I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, but I know that what I feel is right is to not, give rise or platform, things that are just completely counter to my own perspective and my own belief that, humans should be treated well and live with dignity,
Right.
And I'm not going to platform anybody that disagrees with that perspective. I have no reason to do that. I don't have to do that. All I can do is tell you why I believe what I believe and why I believe, if ever it were to come up, why I believe that their perspective is incorrect, but I don't need to give them a seat at the table to do that.
Right. I mean, and it's just, you can sit there and the thing that I kind of default to, and I can do that because I primarily focus on science when it comes to my channel. What did the studies say? And I always talk about what the studies say. If I want to know what a serial killer thinks, I'll just go to the scientific papers. I'll pull what those are because I know those people did their research. They had peer review. They went through the rigors of that. They had their evidence checked and double checked and triple checked. I will go to what the science says on how it is. And again, that's ever evolving and changing, and I will shift my perspective accordingly. But it's not my job to connect on a deep level with somebody who has extremely problematic views. Right. I can default to experts in the field who deal with that every single day because that is their profession. They're trained. They're going to understand things better than I will. And they'll be able to say, oh, yeah, no, that's what this is. And right. I will miss that because I don't have their eyes. I don't have the eyes that they do because their eyes come with years of experience. Exactly. And so I can pull that, I can read that, and I can translate that to the public. So as far as learning, so this leads kind of into the whole learning thing. I feel, and this is just my experience, and this is what I've learned when I've been in education, and I have a master's degree in that. When you want people to understand a perspective, you present the correct one first. And you say, this is how we think. This is the train of thought. This is the process. And then you go, this is the other thought here, and this is why it's incorrect. So if I was doing a math problem, I could post this math problem and say, okay, these are the various ways that I can solve this problem and get the correct answer. Now, let's talk about all the ways that you're going to get hang up and get the wrong answer. And then you go through and you say, you could get stuck here with this train of thought, and that's going to lead you to this wrong answer. You can get stuck here, and that's going to lead to this train of thought, and this is going to get you the wrong answer. So these are all the hang-ups that your brain, you might get stuck on, that's going to push you towards this wrong answer. So I can't help but apply that to my content and say, this is what the correct answer is. This is the information here. Here's stuff that you might have heard, and this is why it's wrong. So I feel you always present the correct answer first. You talk in detail as to why it's correct, and then you say, okay, now that we know what the actual evidence and information is, let's talk about people who think that this is wrong and why. This is why they get, and these are the mistakes that they make. These are the issues that they raise, but this is why it's incorrect. And I feel like that's vastly lacking a lot in digital media, in news, in newspapers, across the board, everywhere. And why when people platform certain extremists, they don't sit there and go, okay, well, this is why so-and-so's argument is vastly incorrect for these reasons. You don't have a lot of that heavy discussion that's involving that. And so you're showing just this problematic thought process, but you're not showing what the correct process of thinking is first. That's not harmful or causes issues. That promotes an inclusive environment. You don't have that thought process. You're just showing, okay, here's this problem, having at it. Yeah, they're both wrong, but there's not enough heavy, in-depth discussion as to why or what the correct answer is.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on that in regard to learning?
Well, it's complicated because people have their attention span isn't quite there. I mean, if you look at, if you do kind of like the videos that I do, and I know that you have and have them on your channel where you just don't have a live stream, you present something and that's it. You'll see that, the average attention span for like a 10-minute video is, 3 or 4 minutes and then they move on. And so how do you convey all of those things and intricacies and complications and different perspectives and why all the reasonings behind, or as many as you can think of, behind why it's incorrect in a very finite period. And I think that's kind of something that even the media today struggle with is the attention span issue, the fact that things that are more sensational do get more quote unquote views if you're on YouTube.
They do.
They get more watch time on television if you still have that medium. And I don't know how to shift people's perspectives in that regard, or to help with people's attention span, or
it's brevity, and it's a challenge. How do you condense a strong message into a short, brief thing? So that kind of brings us back to the propaganda thing. We kind of have to play as science communicators. We have to kind of play a little bit of that game in like vaccines cause adults, drinking bleach cures life. I'm an ape who throws feces, THESES. That's something that I picked up on my Spirited Science show a Friday or so ago. I'm an ape who throws feces, not feces, but with TH. So it's just stuff like that, to where you have these catchy phrases, and you're like, oh, it you have to have the draw in. You have to have the people go, okay, so this is cool, this is fun. It's a marketing thing. That's what that's what it comes down to is a marketing thing. So what are you going to market? And that's essentially, I guess, what it kind of comes down to. And then they come for, I post a lot of dad jokes on my Twitter account. People think they're hilarious. I post a lot of really silly, sciencey dad jokes. And someone's like, okay, well, she does science content. Maybe I'll watch a little bit of this. Oh, she tells a really silly joke. Oh, she does these things here too. So I think, and I kind of agree a little bit with this paper, you have to put a face and a person to the content that you can is engaging. They can ask you questions. They're not intimidated. And so that's kind of where you and I have a bit of that challenge. How do we engage the public in a positive way and try to shift towards an inclusive environment that embraces differences, talks about hard and controversial topics without making things worse?
Well, and here's something that I think people forget too, is that I don't have to embrace anybody. that I think is counter to to um, to progress.
Right.
I don't have to do that. I don't have to tolerate intolerance. That's ridiculous.
Exactly.
That narrative that, people have to tolerate you and to allow you that platform to just spew bile is BS. And I don't have to do it. And I refuse to do it. And I will continue to tell people I don't tolerate intolerance. That's just not that's not how this works.
No, I agree.
And so we do want to foster an environment that does include differences, but those differences don't have to include hate.
I agree. Yes.
So I just want to make sure that everybody understands my perspective and why I want to put a caveat there about the spaces that we're creating and the progress that we want to see and what we will and will not tolerate. And I will not tolerate hateful people.
I don't either.
To do that, and I don't have to.
That's kind of how I feel. That I feel similarly. You can foster an environment with the media that you present. And like, this is not okay. We're not going to stand for this. This is not an acceptable behavior. And this kind of behavior is not welcome here. We don't foster an oppressive type of mindset. That's not what science is. Science is, it's just, I feel that if you have an oppressive mindset, you're limiting yourself in the different sciences because you're saying that this isn't okay. I'm just exclusively focusing on this one thing, and you're alienating a lot of other groups of people that could contribute substantially to our movement forward and progress forward. I mean, gosh, can you imagine if we were inclusive from the beginning in science with women, people of color, diversity, how much further we would be right now?
Probably be great. It'd be a great community, I would imagine.
So, I feel like oppressive ideologies are counterproductive to the bank of knowledge that we could get. And so it's not conducive for what I want to do to highlight or allow people in, whether it's in my chat, my comments on my show, that type. And I can make that plain. I'm like, you know what? Internet's pretty big. You don't have to use me as your crying towel. Right. I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to entertain your thoughts, and I don't need to listen to your words to understand what you're talking about because I have a background in research and I can go and read all kinds of studies based on your mentality because we have the internet for that.
Right. Yeah, and that's just the thing. I don't have to be your lightning rod here either. Right. I don't have to be your punching bag. And I feel like so many people on a particular side of the conversation end up being that punching bag because they're told from the other side that they're supposed to be yelled at, that they're supposed to be listened to. Regardless of how extreme their perspective is, regardless of how hateful their perspective is, that they're told that they should be listened to. And I am under the mindset that is a lie. Nobody has to listen to anybody if they don't want to.
It's just, they're like, free speech. My free speech is being hindered if you don't listen to me. No, you can go stand in a cornfield and say whatever you want and I don't have to listen to you. So somebody has a message on Periscope. How do you respond to those who abuse the system? So I think I would need more information on that. So people who utilize the various avenues of media to perpetuate their particular oppressive ideologies, I'm guessing that's what you're saying. I try to be louder than them. I mean, that's really all you can do is try to say, okay, here's what the facts are. The thing that bothers me, and I try to stay as focused on science as possible with this particular channel. And so I'll always cite studies, always talk about here's studies that have formed my perspective. If you have any others you want me to check out, man, that'd be great. But there are entire fields of study just based on racism, on gender studies, on transgender studies. I've had conversations with psychologists whose entire field of work is on racism trauma and transgender trauma. So there are sciences that are attached to various social issues. And so when I start talking about a social issue, I talk about the science associated with it, because a lot of people don't understand. They're like, oh, well, SJW this. I'm like, yes, I'm a science journal warrior. Thank you. So I kind of throw that out there. Here are studies associated with sexism, with racism, with gender bias, with transgender studies. So I'll just throw all of this out there and like, have a read. Look at this. This is what the science says. So if you trust the science that gave you your cell phone, maybe you'll trust the science that produces these other studies as well. Not everything's quantitative. Some of it's qualitative. I've done research in both areas. So that's kind of how I combat that. If I see like an oppressive ideology, well, race is genetic thing that happens in Darwinism, blah, blah, blah. And I see all this other stuff. I'm like, okay, look, it's just melanin amount. That's really just literally it. That's it. So I just kind of throw that out there. You're using science as a means to oppress an entire population of people, and you're misusing it in that regard.
Right.
So
that's something that, you'll see these people do. For instance, like literally there's this thing called racism science, where it's, as you mentioned, it's basically trying to justify racism based off of bad science or based off of a misunderstanding of the findings. I end up in Stefan Milanou's Twitter thread a lot, trying to debunk him because he doesn't understand anything about the brain. And the conclusions that he ends up making, I don't know if you're familiar with this particular individual, but the conclusions that he ends up making are very faulty. For one, there was a study that recently showed that higher IQ individuals have more brain cells concentrated in a specific area of the brain. And so he thereby concluded that white people are therefore more intelligent than any other race because they have larger brains.
That was a stretch.
Absolutely 100% not at all what that study said.
Oh my goodness. You mean so like drinking red wine is the same as going to the gym?
Yeah, why not? Right?
I'm going to have like 4 bottles tonight. Maybe I'll lose like 1,000 calories.
Hey, you never know. You never know. You can have an adverse reaction to it and vomit, and then you've lost 400 calories. You never know.
You never know. I hate that. That's so frustrating because people then use that. It's insanely
frustrating. It's insane to me that he gets that platform to spew that information too, because it's so wrong, it's so unscientific, it's not verified, and he's perverting a field as well in the process.
Yes.
He's perverting those findings, and I'm sure that researcher would not be very appreciative of that if they knew
not at all
that's what he was doing with it, considering his reach that he has. And he has a very large reach, unfortunately.
Oh,
so
gosh.
I have no idea how to combat that. I don't think they're necessarily misusing these platforms, right? I think he's using a platform that's conducive to what he needs to do. So, how do you, if you're a small channel like me or relatively small like you, how do we amplify the message that we want, that we believe will help society over the long haul? I have no idea.
Honestly, I feel like we got to get people to care. So that's what it comes down to. We have to get people to care about themselves and other people, and realize that this is a real thing and science literacy is a problem. And so it I kind of go back to, it's all about marketing. It's all about trying to get people to not be afraid of science, to realize that they too can understand it. There are people who are caring and considerate that want to genuinely help others that are in this field. It just really, I really feel like it comes down to getting people to care. So I almost feel like Tinkerbell. Everybody clap your hands really, really hard, and like we can just light up and stuff. It's like at the end of Peter Pan, we're like, guys, if you've ever been to like the actual play, at the end, Tinkerbell's like really, really sick. And she needs people to believe in her in order to continue on and be a fairy. And so everybody in the audience has to clap and cheer and get her going again to where she can like, I'm alive again. It almost kind of feels like that. You have to get people invested in what you're doing. And understand that what you're doing is important. It's relevant. It's helpful to them and the people in their community and their lives. And I think that's kind of where I feel like that paper was going. We have to generate this inclusiveness and say, you do matter as a person. We want to make certain that you're okay and the people around you are okay. It's not just about you, but we're all in this together. Right. And so, perpetuating that mentality, and trying to get a positive type of thing. Because, this is just, man, I just have no words for you right now.
So I have a question for you, because we're all talking about being responsible with, our platform that we have. What do you think, if you did a cost benefit analysis, for instance, in your head, and, a mind game here, you basically start platforming bad ideas, or start doing the more controversial stuff and giving these voices things to enable your growth, right? So that you can thereby, no longer platform that stuff and only talk about the benefits or the stuff that you think that will help progress us as a society. What do you think where do you see that falling, like as a strategy?
I think that's a pretty interesting strategy, and my mind immediately went to, I'm just stripping to get through college. So it just kind of felt, and I'm not, that's not a diss on sex workers. I really wish we could just handle that and legalize, a lot of that. I do think that would solve a lot of the issues that we have with that. But it's almost like, because of the fact that we're not in a society where both are allowed. If I was like not a woman, if I was a dude and I was able to get through my education, and I think there's a lot more forgiveness for like a guy versus myself.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And also the fact, if I ever wanted to teach high school again, if I ever wanted to be able to work with children, I don't think that would, if that was something for my own personal future, I don't know if I could entertain that kind of idea of saying, okay, let me get an alt-right person on here and just rip them to shreds. And I could do that. I could do the whole, free-for-all, whatever, and just rip them apart. And, there might be some benefit to that in views. There might be some benefit to that if I was able to effectively prepare, and if I knew who was coming on, their stance, watched all their stuff, researched everything, even brought in another expert, rip them apart. There might be some benefit to that, but I almost feel like that, because of my ethical concerns, that would be so much work. I don't know how much that would be worth it, because I would be so worried that somebody would take a section of that particular episode and run with it with an oppressive ideology. Right. I don't know that I could compromise my ethics or my, how I feel about that to just get the extra views.
Right.
So I'm not certain about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to worry about that so much because I don't have I don't do these type of interview style things. I usually, if I
Right,
do
right,
have somebody on, I usually have a tie-in, an episode tie-in about the
right.
subject matter
Mm-hmm.
that pertains to the brain. Um, but yeah, I think that would be a hard, is it, I'm playing the game until I can define the rules type of situation, or do
Mm-hmm.
you really defer to just doing it as taking the long haul and building up the work? One thing I do want to note that kind of resonated with me, by the way, is you saying that this would be more forgiving if I was a male, or something like that, which is absolutely something that I experience a lot, even on my own little channel. Is
Mm-hmm.
there's always somebody critiquing because they don't like my voice, or something that you would never think of. Like guys don't get critiqued over having a
Yeah.
voice or over having a lower voice, and then having
Probably
that.
don't get sexual comments either.
Right.
Yeah, not
You
so
don't, you,
often.
they don't get that
So,
critique. They don't get
yeah.
that. And if they do, it's like, oh, you have a nice voice. It's never, oh, you know what? You need to have vocal lessons because you talk like an old woman. You know what I mean? And that's the kind of comments I get.
Yeah, they're not inherently productive or, any
Mhm.
kind of productive criticism. It's like I sometimes I get comments like your voice it's just a little bit loud in this section. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
I need to fix that. Or, this music was too loud at the beginning. Okay, thank you for that. It's like, you know what? I don't like your hair.
Right.
Or, and then you get the like, wildly inappropriate comments. So it's
Mhm.
just yeah, so
So,
I don't think I think if I was like a white dude, it would be a far different experience, and it would be way more forgiving for
yeah.
me in the long run, career wise, as well as YouTube wise.
Hmm.
Because I
Yeah.
think, in outside of the online world, I think it would be a bit more forgiving if I was a dude than
Yeah,
if
I
I
agree.
was a woman. I mean, we do have a lot of statistics to kind of support that. So,
Yeah.
gosh.
I mean, it's crazy. It's just
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Like, and that's also more of a reason to kind of defer to caution,
Mm-hmm.
being cautious
Right.
over anything, is because you're already getting critiqued over all of these minor things that most
Mm-hmm.
men, I've never seen them ever get critiqued on the things that I get critiqued about. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
I never see a critique on a guy's voice. I never see a critique on them not smiling enough that day.
Right.
Um,
Have you checked out? You should check out some. And as far as trolling, I did an episode on trolls and the type and the ones that become problematic. How they tend to be what they call the dark triad, where
mhm.
they're sadistic and they also are Machiavellian and tend to be psychopathic, and how there's a difference between the type of trolling that women get versus men. And
Oh yeah, I bet that.
Pew Research has a phenomenal breakdown of that, and how the views that it's not taken as seriously as it
Mhm.
should be. But you might want to kind of dig into that. That might be something you're interested in to
Yeah,
kind of say,
I'm
but
definitely
so
interested. I will look into that for sure. Again, all the more reason to just be cautious and use your platform as wisely as you can.
absolutely.
You're already, putting up such a huge shield to begin with,
Oh my goodness.
that I don't think people realize, that you're having to do. It's
Hmm.
performative in that regard.
It is.
And people, do people really think that I'm just sitting there going like, yeah, no, no, and this, and this happens in this part? When I
Oh my
explain,
God.
of
It's like I
course not. I'm
totally
not
like
doing
had the
that.
hardest part of my day was picking out my lipstick.
And I'm not, and I get excited and passionate about the things that I know and love, but I'm not sitting there going, doing
Yeah.
all the and this is over here like this, and this is here like this. I'm not all like smiles and sunshine. I will be very serious about it.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
so
Yeah.
it's a performance in that regard that, you have to put on. You have to put on your performance and shield. Even just going out of the house, you have to put on that
Yeah.
performance.
Gosh, man.
And I'm sure everybody feels that way to some extent, that they can never really express themselves. Um,
Yeah.
but I think women particularly have, and men too. Men have a
Yeah.
different type of standard applied to them, whether it's, being particularly masculine and
Right,
not
right.
showing the range of emotions in which we are capable of expressing. Um, whether it's that, or whether it's, women not allowed to be angry,
Right. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
women being should be accustomed to being critiqued based off of their appearance, or based off of them not having a soothing voice that they should have, anything along those
Let me
lines.
get in the kitchen and make you a sandwich and some cookies. You just sit
Right.
down. Yeah,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, it's just crazy. We've been going on for like an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh, wow. So we can like talk forever.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so wrapping this up, I think we kind of come to the conclusion that we need to kind of foster and generate an inclusive environment that promotes positivity,
Hmm.
and trying to get people to care about their local community, to get involved, and to try to point out an overall connectivity for the good of all people. I mean, I think we understand a bit how people learn that changing perspectives is really really difficult. I don't know. Just as an aside, I don't know if you've talked or seen Dr. Amanda Glaze. She's been on my show a couple times. She talks about, she's an evolution educator, and one of the things that she talks about is the fact that a lot of people who are exposed to evolution information as far as the evidence, when if they're deeply religious, they have to come to terms with the fact that they've been lied to. They're even being
Right.
lied to by the scientists producing the information, or they've been lied to by the people in their community. And so there's a lack of care for that. You just shove this information of their face and you're just like, here
Hmm.
it is, you're just wrong, bye. But there's no care involved in how that affects that person who's
Yeah.
faced with that particular type of information. And perhaps we need to kind of bring that in and say, I know this is heavily contradicting your particular belief system.
Right.
This is what it is, but I'm not just going to drop you. I'm here. You're important. Everybody's important. Let's kind of move towards this positivity and let's kind of help each other out. And so she said, that's one of the things that she works on, is the fact that there's a complete and total lack
Mm.
of care and consideration for the fact that these people have a lot of cognitive dissonance and they have to face the fact
Yeah.
that they've been lied to by somebody, and
That they trust.
that they
I mean, that's
trust.
that's an earth-shattering moment for them.
It really
Um,
is.
and you're right. That's not something that I took into consideration at all. But yeah, it's true. People, when they have to reevaluate their perspectives and realize that they need to change them entirely,
Yeah.
and that they learned it from the people that they love the most,
Right.
it feels like a betrayal to some extent. It feels like,
So,
why didn't you teach me the right thing? Why did you hurt me this way?
right, right.
Um,
Perhaps that's
and
another
yeah,
episode
right.
where we
It
talk
probably
about.
is. This isn't, I would not be qualified to speak on this, but I could
Yeah.
definitely see why it needs to be talked about.
We could dig into that and see what the science says. Well, I guess this is a good spot to wrap up because we're reaching on like, oh gosh, an hour and 48 minutes. It's been an absolute joy having you on the show tonight.
Well, thank you for having me again. I
This
love
is
it, and I like the conversations you provoke.
I like it too, and it's important that we understand as we finish. No topic is off limits, but there's a way that we can go about it to where we can
Hmm.
talk about what the correct way of thinking is versus the incorrect way, so that we don't promote oppressive ideology and cause further harm to other humans and other people. And so we need to have hard conversations. We need to have these hard dialogues so we can understand, but we don't necessarily want to contribute to any further issues or problems. And I think especially with the internet still being relatively new, we're still learning a lot about it. So much like science evolves, we as people need to evolve and understand that speech is always changing. And so we also need to communicate a bit differently with each era that we enter, as we enter each era rapidly.
I know.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Please check out her channel, Brief Brain Facts. There's a link for it in the description. I'm sure I'll have her back again. She's just absolutely amazing. And so I've hopped on her channel. She's hopped on mine. It's just been great. And so thank you guys for watching. I'm going to pop a picture of my patrons up really quick, like all my patrons here. So James, Jen, Carl, Patrick, Daniel, Stephen, Paula, Carrie, Cersei, Keith, Duke, James, Nana, Andy, Zachary, Tony, Bo, Stephen, Sarah, Chris, Graham, Dragnot, Gallus, Iowan, Jennifer, Richard, Doc, Fearsome, and Neil. Thank you so much for all that you do. You contribute to me keeping the lights on, and the work that I do here is extremely important. You also contribute to my science literacy ad campaigns, as well as teacher resources, my website, all of that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Amanda, for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me again.
Yay!
I appreciate it.
And if you have questions for her, you can find her on Twitter at Brief Brain Facts. You can find me on ScientistMel on Twitter as well. You can leave any questions in the comments, and we will be happy to respond. And if you're interested in the paper that I read from today, just hit me up on Twitter in a DM with your email, and I'll email it to you. Isn't that great? I'll just send you stuff straight to you because it's behind a paywall, and I have access to it, so I'll just send it to you. So it's great. Well, thanks again for being here, guys. You guys have a great Thursday night.
Yay!
Bye!